Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Jess.
Hello, world.
And Alex.
Hallelujah.
Again.
Are you always going to reference that Chris Rice song?
I think he always is singing that song.
No, that was not Chris Rice.
Yeah.
It's not?
No, there was a kid song. Hallelujah, hallelujah. No, it's a Yabba Dabba Doo Ya.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Scooby Dooby
It was
Doo.
really close. Beavis and that other guy.
And that other guy.
Yeah, all right.
So, no, you all brought Chris Rice.
Yeah, what a bunch of Christian nerds on this podcast.
Yeah.
Just like referencing the cartoon song.
So cool.
Every episode, if we can bring up the cartoon song, we've done it. We have made it to the Christian zeitgeist.
So it never gets forgotten, you know?
Yeah. He'll never
Easter's
let it down.
coming.
Yeah.
It's going to be here soon.
That's true.
What was like your Easter morning like as a kid? Did you guys like do egg hunts? Did you do basket hunts? What was just go to church? Did you dress up? Like, did you know, hey, this is the
Halloween?
day. This is the I'm like in
What are we
This is
dressing
the
up
day
as?
you wear
Like-
your Easter dress?
Oh, you mean
East-
clothes.
yeah,
I thought
clothes.
you meant costumes. I was like, what am I dressed
Like,
up
did
as
you take it up
Jesus and
a
go
notch?
dress up as the Easter bunny and go to church?
in
or
high
like-
school. I did one time. I was Jesus in a play, and for it,
For
I got
Easter?
Yeah, like I was like, I came out of the tomb, like with a big like sheet kind of thing on. You know, I was
Wow.
resurrected.
toga.
And I had to be in there the whole service, okay, till I popped out of the tomb. But there was a lady named Sister Brown that went to the church, and I had kind of a shaggier hair in high school.
Yeah.
And she gave me a weave
Oh.
to be Jesus.
So you had
and
longer
so I
hair.
went to her hair, and I had like long hair, and she had to do it on Thursday. So I had to wear a weave to school, like I was a sophomore or junior.
To Old Burke High School.
Yeah, that day.
they're like-
And it was a glue-on one, so it wasn't the stitch-in
Oh,
one. But
my
it looked,
goodness.
I mean, it was pretty legit looking.
Why
Yeah.
do we even share our Easters, Eric?
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
I don't
That-
have a good Easter.
Jesus
compared
and
to
a
that.
weave.
So, yeah, what did you do, Jess? You were shaking your head. You did nothing?
No.
Did you celebrate Easter?
We went to church,
Did you make
but
it-
I never.
Did you dress up more than a normal
Maybe
Sunday?
I think maybe I might have worn like an Easter dress, but we never did like Easter bunny or Easter egg hunt or anything like that.
Baskets? Did you even get
No.
Easter baskets?
Nope,
Nothing.
Nothing.
I might have.
Which
Go ahead.
I feel like it's what makes being a parent fun because I feel like my kids get to have fun and me too.
Yeah.
So sorry to be a downer.
Yeah, I might have worn
That's
my
fine.
Didn't do it.
my Easter bolo tie for that. So, yeah,
Yes.
really a special moment.
I love bolos.
Maybe a little.
They're a lost
yeah.
treasure.
Need to bring it back.
Yeah, you do.
Shop for some of those. Yeah, we always dressed up a little more. My mom was a basket hider. She'd hide a little basket of things.
basket
I
hider.
remember one specifically because I loved the Ninja Turtles. There was a rabbit Ninja Turtle action figure that she got me in my basket on Easter, and I thought, oh, that's nice. It's very thematic.
Yeah,
for
it
the
is,
day.
and probably a rare in this day and age.
Yeah. Anyways,
Ninja Turtle with
nothing too crazy
bunny
though.
ears.
Yeah, we were just basket hiders, and then, yeah, we definitely dressed
Basket
up.
hiders.
Sounds almost like
Definitely.
a
Is
derogatory
Is basket hiders
thing
like
to call
you try to
someone.
find the basket, or is it like a scavenger hunt?
Yeah.
No, you go find your basket, and it's got like
It's hidden
candy
in the
it.
house somewhere.
You know,
Oh,
I'm a
sounds
big
fun.
black jelly bean fan, so
Me
I would always
too.
take all the black jelly beans
I
from
love
everybody.
black jelly
and
beans.
Oh, thank you.
Family would, a
This
couple
is
weeks
probably the
out, go
only-
to Burlington Coat Factory and get ourselves a.
During this
nice-
podcast, I'm learning so much that you two have in common.
And I was
black-
going to say
like-
this is probably the only time we'll ever be the majority for black jelly beans.
Are you saying you don't like them, Eric?
I do not like them, but you're also both the same Enneagram. I mean, it's just
I know.
I'm learning so much. That's all. It's just it's a journey. All right. Well, up next we've got headlines. All right, our first and only headline for this week comes from Omaha.com. It says, Angry Moms. Disney films menstruation talk not appropriate. Period. Are they right? This is the headline from the World Herald. This is regarding the Disney Pixar film Turning Red. It has made many a parent turn red on social media in the face.
Yeah. And actually, I got a couple emails this week from parents to us to ask us to talk about this, which is great. Like, if there's things you would like us to talk about, it's always fun. And this is partly one of our podcast is uncomfortable conversations about culture and Christianity. And so these are the things we want to be able to discuss because we know people are, discussing them and trying to make decisions and whatever. So glad we can talk about it and hopefully give some insight to our opinion on it, which is always needs to be stated is our opinion.
Yeah.
This is not a rubber stamp from CCC approval or disapproval. But
And I feel like a lot of times with things like this, we're kind of processing it at the same time as people are also processing it. So it's like, let's all have a conversation together.
yeah, so here's how it happened for me. I'll just say we watched it. My
let
family
us know.
watched it.
Your whole family watched it?
We did.
Were you a preview parent, or did you guys just dive in
I did
head
not
first?
preview.
So we dove in head first.
Everyone
we
at
had
this-
watched the previews.
But everyone at this table, we all just watched it first time with our kids.
Yes.
Okay.
That's how it happens. And we've typically done that. I set up like a little projector on the wall in our basement every so often. We like do a movie night. And so we had watched the preview, and knew it was coming out. Kids were talking about it at school and so on and so forth. And so we watched it. Honestly, Aaron and our immediate reaction after watching with all our kids was like, I hope a lot of those things went over their heads. I've got, just for knowledge of people, a 9-year-old boy, a 7-year-old girl, 5-year-old daughter, and a 3-year-old daughter. And so we were like, yeah, that's definitely one of those not going on, though. We're going to like keep watching it, recycle list, and learn all the songs and stuff like that for our kids. And so that's where we landed after watching it. And then I remember immediately, like after that, this post that went viral on Facebook was like, there was a specific mom. And then all these people were like, you don't watch it. It's the worst thing ever. They said crap and things like that. And then there was like this big reaction to that, which there's things on it I agreed with, but also for us, we were like, yeah, there were things that were like, it's just not going to be in the rotation again. And so, but also like my sister was asking me our opinion on it because she had read that blog, and I think there was a lot of people freaking out over it.
Can you explain the blog a little bit? Because I'm not sure. I know of it, but I don't know what the crux of that blog was.
It was like a mom basically that was like on Facebook, don't watch this movie if you love your kids or love your family.
Jeez.
I don't think okay, I'm maybe being extreme.
I think you're being a little
extreme, but it's like, don't watch this.
It was pretty biased towards not watching.
It teaches bad principles, like which it does. It brings up, and we'll talk about that maybe more. Like it brings up menstruation and periods and things like that.
What do you guys think about that?
And so, which is what
lots of comments.
The title of this article is about.
I know. Angry
moms. And so this would have been one of these angry moms that talked about it. And, the words that were used, there's some kind of, pointing out some of the seances. It felt like it was, you could do this with any movie and start to take all these liberties and say how it's just terrible and trying to shift culture. There are points, my panda, my choice. That was a statement at
the very end. There was like a little end of it. book end to the whole film.
Which does have, it would seem to me a pretty clear indication to the term "my body, my choice."
Right.
And so there are some of those things that, went into it. But it seemed like my kids didn't understand a lot of what was going on. And I look back as an adult now, and I'm like, oh, that happened in that movie? That's what that means? And so I'm sure at some point they will, and we'll continue to have conversations about it. But they're not kicking and screaming or freaking out. I don't think any of them were like, that was the best movie ever kind of thing either. So that was our experience, and I've got other thoughts, but I want to hear you guys' experience.
Go ahead, Jess.
My first hearing of the movie was from that post that you're talking about, and I'm sure lots of people listening have heard or read. And
so you read the post and then you still watched it.
I read the post. I saw people that I care about on Facebook in arguments over this, and
Did you start turning red?
What I usually do is I found that I'm really interesting because I usually get curious about my reactions to things because I pull emotion out because there's so emotion in, and I don't know if that's just like my life and personality of like how I grew up, but like I pull emotion out and I just look at the facts. Okay, let me read the facts and not the comments. And my first time seeing somebody watching it, I was trying out a new gym, knew no one there, and there was a mom. So from reading this post, I saw these 3 little girls, and I asked how old they were. They were like 8, 6, 3, sitting around iPad watching it. Mom is going to do the workout with me. And in that moment, I thought, I could judge this mom based on that post. Like, I have a choice, and we have a choice when we're, looking at that stuff. So it kind of made me think of like a bigger picture of how judgmental we are of other people's parenting.
Yeah.
So this kind of I want to get on a soapbox about a lot of stuff too, because like even this article is like angry moms.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like that kind of like kind of does a stereotype for moms, but then also I think it like reduces a dad's opinion and feelings about it. So there's that. But we did watch it as a family. My kids are 7, 6, 3. And I think a lot of it went over their head also, though, and I think it's not a secret from past podcasts, like especially the kids with sexuality, like my kids know correct autonomy and verbiage, and they know that I have a period. I don't hide it from them. And like they know what pads and all that stuff is. And so when because it is pretty it doesn't hide it. I mean, it is kind of like right in your face. So I'll say that. But I just feel like it had to do with just like my parenting, and I was just like, I actively watched it with them. It wasn't like I watched it in the background. And I was the same, Alex, at the end I was kind of like, this is just kind of a one and done show. And I also chose, I think part of the reason I chose to watch it was with the grain of salt of like, I've let my kids watch Mulan, and that's ancestors and summoning, spirits. I mean, there's lots of different things that are woven into our culture.
Yeah.
So I'm like, to me, it's like, I want to be an active, present parent. And like, if there's questions, like I'm there. But I do think for me, a lot of the stuff went over heads with kids' ages. Now I have friends that have older kids, and I feel like that from what I've heard from them, it's more positive of like, this was like, it allowed us to have like a better conversation about having a period, like our, and even just like the other things that are woven throughout the movie. But
yeah,
probably wouldn't say watch it again. I did research though beyond the post.
Yeah, and
like I looked up, okay, who directed it? Why'd they do it? It's the first female director that has ever directed a Pixar movie, and so she was kind of like putting her stamp on.
It's very much,
and I think
based on her experience too. She's Canadian. She's is Asian,
right?
So it's a lot of her experience.
We lose that sight too of like, and I went into it thinking this is based in a different culture, like a different mindset. But the director was pretty explicit of like, yeah, that was about periods, and the panda is red for a reason, and how she reacted with hormones and things. But I was expecting worse based on what I read. And so I think for me, it was like, this isn't as bad based on what I saw on Facebook, but it's also like, God says, guard your heart. Like, I think as parents, it's our responsibility to guard our kids' hearts and to know like where they're at and what we can handle and what we want in our families and in our lives. And like, I think to a lot of extent, like that's like each parent's right to do that.
Yeah.
Thoughts, Eric?
Yeah. So same kind of thing. I mean, I have a 12-year-old daughter and an 11-year-old son. And so my daughter kind of came home from school saying, hey, we should watch this, because she'd been hearing things. I mean, you've kind of prefaced this with she goes to a Christian school. And so there's obviously, kids either saying it's bad or good or whatever. And, so I think she's like her dad, and it was controversial, and she wanted to watch it, and so we watched it, and it's just one of those things that it's I understand a lot of the outcry from the surface level where people are I know the my fandom, my choice thing. As soon as I heard that, I had to roll my eyes because I'm like, oh, this is just gonna get the outrage machine fired up. People are gonna just take this and run with it. But to a certain extent, you either shelter your kids from all media outside of the church or not. Like, it's just this stuff is in there. This message of embrace the beast, embrace the side, like the bad side of you, embrace your bad tendency, like all that stuff around identity is going to be out there. So you either going to hide your kids from it forever, or you're going to let them know how to process it and talk through them with that. And so it's just, you can fall on either side of that, and that's fine. But from my perspective, I don't want to set my kids up to fail when they have to deal with real world experiences. And so, yes, these messages are in there, and I understand that they can be interpreted in ways that are negative. But also, when the dad is talking to his daughter about the fact that we are all messy people and we have messes. And I think yes, that can be taken as, oh, well, just embrace it. It's fine. It doesn't matter, but it's also like, there are some things about us that are messy that aren't just there's no magic fix for it. Yes, we can try to get better. We can try to do better. We can actively change our behaviors. We can pray. We can do a lot of things even as Christians to try to change that. But there's a certain extent where we have to identify that too, and go, this is a mess. And I think that a lot of like Christian culture, especially the way I was raised, is if you had any mess, you definitely didn't let anybody know about it, and you hid that. And I think a lot of it is speaking to your personality and your identity. And like sometimes we, again, I guess to reference even this, Genesis, like what we're talking about a lot, it's like there's a part of us that is just rebellious. Like that's in us. That's human nature. We have that, we've seen it over and over again. I get rebellious in a church service when someone tells me to raise my hand or do something like that. I feel rebellious. Or that we saw a whole 2 years of people being rebellious when they got told to wear a mask or take a vaccine. Like rebellion is a part of our nature that we're going to confront it in one way or another. But I think that we have to acknowledge that that's a part of our humanity. And so, yeah, I think talking with your kids through this stuff is really important. The other side of it is like, I watched this movie and, I got a little emotional sometimes. I laughed sometimes. I just took it all in, and I got to be there with my 12-year-old daughter, who this is an experience that she's going to be going through because this is just the way the world works. And if you're going to, you can't be in denial of that menstruation as a thing that is part of the female anatomy. That's just what's going to happen. And I would rather her see me go, oh, well, look at this. This is the way it is. This is part of who you are. I'm not freaking out about it. I'm not getting upset and going, oh, that's so disgusting. We don't talk about that. And that's shameful. And you should have all this shame. Like, I'm just not going to, I'm excited that she can see me react in a positive way to that. So I don't know. There's a lot more I could probably go on, but I don't want to just blabbing.
Yeah, I'll say the one thing that was a reminder for myself and Aaron in our parenting style is like we want to do as much as we can to be proactive instead of reactive. And it was just a reminder that, hey, we probably should have been more proactive and, taking the time, especially as our kids are getting older. There's YouTube, there's all these things out. We try to like, hey, we want to, if you're going to watch something on YouTube at all, like we want to know, and it's not just controlling, but we want to protect our kids' hearts. We want to know what they're watching so we can engage with them. And so it's one of those things that is a reminder for us, probably. We need to, if we could have gone back and we should have watched it first. And then honestly, we probably wouldn't have said, hey, let's all watch this as a family tonight. We would have found another movie. Not to say we would never watch it at any time with our kids. But it's one of those things like, okay, the stage our kids are in life, we should have probably watched it, taken that time. It's worth that investment for us. Then discuss it together and, and then go from there. When our kids get older, we'll make those decisions about what movies they go to or not go to. And so, that's probably where we landed. And then it's again, I saw just people freaking out, on both sides, like on social media. And anytime people like to freak out, And there are things that algorithms like to continue to feed into, you know, a cycle when people start talking about it. And I just think there's always that caution on there to remember. Like there's people that I know on both sides that are like, that have freaked out or you know, made posts that I'm like, well, I could judge you a lot based on your like of this post. And I have to remind myself not to like go there, with, you know, with the people that even that are in my circle of people and even my own community group that have shared things. I'm like, I don't totally agree with you, but this isn't the best place for that dialogue. And so I have to just remind myself of that. And yeah, I can't fault parents for knowing and taking it seriously, their kids' hearts and what they guarding those, fighting for their kids. And yeah, you do have to have honest conversations with your kids. If you decide not to, I hope the answer isn't because. That's another thing. Like if your family, if Aaron and I would have decided beforehand, hey, we're not watching this, and all your kids did, and we're like, yeah, because we said so, because it's not Christian, then that wouldn't have been a good answer.
One of the other messages that stood out to me in this film, though, is that the daughter is instigating a lot of these bad behaviors. She's doing a lot of these, and the mother is in denial. And I don't know, I mean, I'm pretty sure we're all familiar with those types of parents.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, and it's like that message comes across so strong that these parents, they, you know, it's like, oh, my child is an angel. They would never do anything wrong. And they won't listen to anyone who tells them otherwise. And so to see this play out in a way that it's like, okay, well, yeah, we can love our kids, but man, they can't. They're of a fallen world too. They're of a fallen nature too. So like they're gonna make mistakes. We can't. And so like there's all these little lessons in here that I think we can pull out. And you know, sure, it's mixed. It's a mixed. You know, it's a fruit salad, whatever you want to call it. But there's a lot in there to take away from it.
And I think it's a hot button. Anything that's kind of parenting related turns into a hot button topic, because where do you feel the most responsibility, and like your mama bear comes out, or your
I'm a better parent
Papa
than
bear.
you, or you're a bad parent, or you're this because of whatever situation.
So,
We had that conversation about public school, private school, and people having those kind of conversations. We had another group, which I think is a couple came on a few. I don't know how long ago it was, but the divorce came on and talked about even just this idea of sexuality and how we should be discussing this with our kids. And so if that's something you're interested in and you're like, oh, this is freaking me out, or we launched our kids into this too early, I don't know what to do. That's a great resource to listen to because they were very, you know, open and honest about, hey, how do we start to have these discussions with our kids? Because we have to have them. Like we can't, we have to. And if we don't, then somebody else is.
Yeah. And I think too, though, when you said like freaking out, somebody that was making that post probably didn't see themselves as freaking out. Yeah. Like they're like following a conviction. And I think that that's like what everybody is doing on both sides. It's like you're fighting for the best for your kid and for your family. And what's best for your kid and your family is might not be what's best for mine.
But but I think even to like talking about like periods and things like that, that are, I mean, girls can have that begin as early as 8 years old. And I think that, I mean, as a parent, you don't want to think about that at that age, but there's stories of girls thinking they're dying because this is happening and they don't know what's going on because nobody talked to them about it. And so maybe this movie isn't the reason you do it, but if nothing else, at least this is a thing that might start that conversation to go, okay, I need to be talking about this stuff with my kids.
It's kind of an opportunity too, as parents, to do like check-ins of like, is this okay? Is it not? I mean, for me looking at you, Eric, this is like not only a great time, like opportunity for you to spend time with your daughter, but it's also something that maybe she's not going to remember the message in that movie, but she's going to remember that her dad took 2 hours and sat with her and did something that she wanted to do. Yeah. And there's just like, there's so much value in it, even outside of the content of like just how you built into their relationship. And so
Alex, would you recommend I delete my Facebook post?
I would not have posted it.
You wouldn't have posted what I posted?
No.
Oh, okay.
You want to share with the world what that was? I wasn't going to actually bring it up.
Oh, you threatened to, so I was just figured I'd get out ahead of it because I thought you were already like,
give me the popcorn. Let me watch this.
No, I think it was reactive because in the moment I was just like, I am seeing so many people what at least the way I felt, we were overreacting to it. And
Helicoptering.
Yeah, and it was just like, and so yeah, I mean, I did post on Facebook, and I mean, I just put, to the parents upset about Turning Red, I have some bad news. The movie's about you, and I know that was like, that was very one sided, and like just stick it in there. And
Alex and I were
you guys were praying for me, I hope.
No,
on the floor, just crying,
but it's
freaking out.
It's just one of those things where it's like that there is a message in this film about that, and it's like we have to be careful, like the way we parent and the way we think of how, because there's this like righteousness that comes with self-righteousness that comes with like protecting my child. There is a righteousness too, but I think that the problem is the self-righteousness, where it's like, oh, I'm guarding my child from all this evil, and you should too, like we said earlier, so it's just sorry.
The scary part about being parents is we're still being parented.
Right. Yeah.
I'm still trying to figure it out, whether it's by my own parents or whether it's hopefully as Christians by God, and He's refining us. And so there's those moments where like I don't want to have to admit that, like I still need guidance and to be parented and to be shepherded in some ways. And so, and I liked when I'm insecure about my own parenting or what I'm doing or compared to other people, then that's when I start to probably become a bad parent, because then I'm just doing it because other people said it on social media. I'm not letting my kid watch it instead of my actual conviction or whatever it might be. And then all of a sudden I want to act more confident than I actually am in my parenting style, because I don't want anybody to see that there's cracks, or I don't want anybody to perceive that I'm not good.
It's like the parent you see in the grocery store that is disciplining their kid for the entire grocery store, not for actually disciplining the kid, but they're like, you are being very bad right now, mister. And like, and it's like, this is obviously for all of us to see that you're being super parent right now, and it isn't actually helping the kid at all. But I think sometimes we do that on social media too.
Sometimes it's a parent.
Yeah.
It's a parent.
Padunkty. All right. Well, that was our Turning Red
let's
segment.
Get to it.
Up next, we get the opportunity to talk with Dr. Karl Pagenkemper to discuss the situation going on in Ukraine. And so stay tuned for that. All right, today we are talking about the war on Ukraine right now, the situation that's happening there between Russia and Ukraine. It's a complicated situation in some ways, and also maybe not so complicated in other ways. We brought Karl here, to Dr. Karl Pagenkemper, to help enlighten us on some of this. Karl, why don't you tell people real quickly, like you have a connection there somewhat, and I'd just maybe let people in on that a little bit.
Sure. I think the first time I traveled to Ukraine was like 89, probably before some guys here were born.
Close.
No, I was
5.
I was teaching in a situation I was invited into with another colleague, and working primarily with the Baptist Consulary, working with pastors. And at that time, the Ukraine was just starting to come out. It hadn't emerged fully, because that wouldn't happen for another 2 years. But they were starting to get some boldness, and in evangelism and ministry, and churches were starting to grow. And it was an early opportunity for me to get in, and it was kind of a fascinating, because I met the head of the Baptist Consulary of all Ukraine, and first time I think I ever had a brush burn from a man who grabbed me and hit me on both sides of the face, and he hadn't shaved a few days.
Okay. I was like, what? Okay, it makes sense now.
Got it. But wonderful experiences when I've been there. And genuinely, and one of the things I remember wandering around the city at nighttime in the city of Kyiv, and I never felt unsafe.
Yeah.
These military kids that couldn't have been older than 18, I keep thinking, we're afraid of these guys? They had big bums, but other than that, I got to admit, I really love the place. And so we got there a few times over the next few years. I was able to get into Russia, Moscow on several occasions as well. And I've got a friend, a former student of mine, who is actually pastoring. I won't say name or specifics, but pastoring in what I think is probably one of the largest Christian non-Orthodox churches in the city of Moscow.
Oh, wow.
And so I do try to stay in touch with him as much as I can. It's been a few days now, but he has access to external. They watch BBC when they can, which is kind of exciting because he's hearing both the internal discussion inside the church and inside of the city, but also some of the external. And it's a very difficult type wire to walk because he, in his church, will have Russian officers, but also have widows from the Chechen conflict, which was a decade and a half plus ago, and they're in the same church. People who lost spouses to some of the very people who are in the church, and at the same time, other members who are Ukrainian who have children that are fighting in the Ukrainian army. So it's in any given church in Moscow right now, it's a really complicated context to be in, much less the situation that's going on in the Ukraine. Now we've heard probably more about what's going on in Ukraine because the mission historically has been quite successful, frankly, since the opening of Ukraine. Even before, mission has been. There are many organizations that have had ministries going on. In fact, many of them are still there, or what they've done is they've moved to the borders to help people move over border supplies, concerns, helping housing, that kind of thing. So there's food. People on the move. There's a lot of them.
With your time in Ukraine, like what are the people like? Like what's their temperaments? I'm assuming it's a lot different than here, but
well, my time is a few years old. I'll be honest with you, because I haven't been back since the mid 2000s. But and I think probably you'll hear more about that in other contexts. But I found them to be as friendly and kind as any people I've traveled to personally. Working with pastors was phenomenal. I mean, these are guys who've been at that time were initially just coming out from underneath the bunker mentality, because they were just trying to survive. I had a translator. I asked him to take me to an art gallery because I want to know what's Russian art look like. We got a free afternoon. Let's go. And so he took me to one. He felt a little guilty because, see, his grandfather had died in prison as a pastor. His father had been imprisoned. And that was the primary reason he really didn't want to become a pastor. But he was willing to be a translator. And he took me around as we were going through one of the art galleries. I can get him to translate things for me. And he looked at me and said, my parents wouldn't be real happy to know that I'm here because this art is a little on the frivolous side. It was a sense of, because they had been under the bunker mentality for so long, survival, much less thriving, they're just starting to, at that time. Now, much has happened since then. Evangelism ministries, discipleship ministries, there are a ton of agencies that have seen a lot of success. And I mean, you can go on the internet now and find Ukrainian music that's Christian music, where they're recording, and some of it's quite moving. It has a little bit of the Ukrainian out in the field type of thing with vast vistas of views and things like that. But the music has a bit of a soulish sound to it. It's mournful, but not unhappy. Much of the time. So I don't know if that gives you much of a flavor.
No, that's good. Also, I mean, something that can also maybe help people with some perspective is our resident here, communications resident Paul, told us, like previous to recording this, that he actually spent many years growing up as a kid in Ukraine. And so we wanted to give him a moment to even share some of his perspective on this situation. So we'll take a look at that now.
Hi, my name is Paul. I'm one of the residents here at CCC, and I grew up for a large portion of my childhood in Ukraine. I lived there on 3 separate occasions for about a total of 7.5 years. While I was there, I lived in the capital city of Kiev, and we got to drive around and go to the different areas that some of you may have heard about lately, like Lviv, and may have visited Kharkiv. It's been a while. It's weird seeing some of the places that I grew up visiting in ruins, seeing them abandoned or shot up. I know some of the people who are still there, who are fighting, and a couple who are actually ministering to the soldiers and their families who are still around. Throughout its history, Ukraine has always been kind of an underdog, since they're kind of the gateway between Asia and the rest of the European continent. It makes them an extremely strategic point to control. People there have been oppressed for generations upon generations upon generations, even before Russia was a world power. I know people who have actually lived through the forced famine that came under Stalin's rule. I know somebody who survived it, and and who watched their people, their family, their friends die because of it. And even after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Ukraine has always seen Russia on the horizon, trying to gain control either through subtle political means, or using puppet leaders, or through annexing different areas, different parts of Ukraine, like Crimea. Looking at pictures on the news and saying oh, I actually remember that place. It's frightening. It's worrisome. I'm thankful that my friends who are still there are still alive and still able to care for the soldiers and the citizens around them. Thankfully, God has been doing some incredible things. He's been protecting people. He's been showing people His love, bringing people to faith. I don't know all the details of all the stories, but what I do know is that He has been working. I think that we can pray for the Russian equipment to fail, for the supply chains to stop, for the missiles that we hear about to drop out of the air onto empty ground. I think that we can pray that the Ukrainians are able to hold fast and stand firm, and to show mercy to any of the Russians that come to them. And I think that we can also ask that the Russians show mercy to the Ukrainians who are across the field from them.
Thanks to Paul for taking the time to do that. It's an interesting perspective and a unique one that I think it helps color this situation, helps us gain a little more proximity to it as well in this conversation.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the hopes always of the podcast too, is we don't know everything, obviously, but it's been fun to invite people in that have more insight, and also you don't know, what's happening. You don't know everybody's life story and the things they've lived through and the perspective that they can offer and the value they bring. So grateful for Paul bringing that to us, and obviously, hear the the emotion, the inner conflict of these are real people. I think when we're so far away, and these are news clips and all that kind of stuff, it feels maybe distant. But then when you know people that are more connected in proximity to this and real stories, like even what you were sharing, Karl, of the pastor that and the people that and you love and you care deeply about, it's good. It's good for our perspective, and I think for our hearts to mourn with those who mourn and hear that. So thanks again, Paul.
I also think that, especially in times like this, I'm just so glad that we asked Paul to share that, because I think that's something that we kind of miss when things like this are going on too, where it's we look at just the information or the scrolling, but we don't stop and listen and say, hey, Karl, you were there. What was your life like? Or Paul, you lived there for 7.5 years. How do you feel about that? Because those people are also, they're going through things. I mean, Paul, that's grief. He lived there. He walked the streets. He knows the people. And just for us to have some increased empathy and compassion when we stop and listen. So thanks for doing that, Eric.
I agree. That was a good, I appreciate that.
Yeah. And I think trying to understand this situation, I mean, sometimes you try to put yourself in those shoes.
Right.
I know my son heard me say Ukraine the other day, and he goes, "Oh, I know what that is." And he just turned 11. I was curious what he knew about it, and and it gave me an opportunity to talk to him, and I'm like, okay. And I think I was making some coffee when we were having this conversation. I'm like, imagine right now, just this day-to-day life that we are used to, that I had to put this coffee down, and you and your sister and your mom had to get out of the house. I had to get my gun, and you didn't know if you were going to see me again. And that's how this is going to happen. And I've got to go fight for the, for the country that you live in, and it's just, it's something that we take for granted, the safety, just the mundaneness that we get to relish in on a day-to-day basis, that it's hard to even fathom, and it's not like I'm trying to scare him, but man, I want my kids to know, like, what they have, because but it's so much more than just iPhones and and fast food or whatever, you know what I mean? Like sometimes what we feel like we know.
And it's like you never thought you'd have to explain that to your 11-year-old.
Yeah.
Or I had the news on the other day, and my almost 8-year-old says, "What movie are you watching?" And I'm like, in that moment, I turn it off or like play it down, or I say, "Hey, this is like something that's happening right now."
Yeah.
And those are the decisions that we're having to make as parents, is how do we do that? How do we navigate that?
When the news intrudes, you're forced to adjust to your own kids. If the president of the United States is doing something in the Oval Office and my daughter hears about it, and she's only 6 and she wants to know what this is.
Yeah.
Now we got war, and kids are aware of it. I think one of the advantages of being where we are, and the disadvantage of the Ukraine, is that we have oceans on either side of us, and we are not enemies of either one of the primary contiguous countries. Ukraine is, I want to say, honestly, it reminds me of the first century of Israel around that time, because Israel is literally the tromping ground between other countries.
Yeah.
Syria fights Egypt, and Egypt fights Syria, and Israel's just sitting in the middle, just getting by. And Ukraine is obviously much larger, but it's in the middle of things, and valuable territory, especially as you look at the Black Sea and access. So it's
Asia, Europe. I mean,
absolutely.
It's right there.
It's a very difficult area of the world to defend. Although it seems to me the Ukrainians are doing a pretty good job of it so far.
Mm-hmm. When it's even amazing, like we were driving down Dodge, or up Dodge. I don't know what direction we were driving, but
Across
Dodge, west, as you all know, to my nice pool in my house. Not true, but and even 132nd, I don't know the name of the company, but they've got those fancy lights, on, and they're all yellow and blue. And then there's this other development happening on 192nd in Dodge. And they've got this fountain, and it's yellow and blue. So there's like even this awareness. And so my kid, when I was driving the other day, was like, "Oh yeah, those are for Ukraine," my 3rd grader. And so it's just interesting to hear even how he's dialoguing about it in school, and because kids are talking about it, and his teacher just they're being invaded by Russia. And even in the Olympics, there was a lot of obvious talk about that, and we watched that a bit. And so. It's something that it seems like, in American culture, there's an empathy, or, countries are standing for, or in whatever ways that we can, which is, people in Omaha.
Pretty limited.
Pretty limited, but even to honor in some kind of ways.
Right. So there is a sense of identification to some degree, even it's so limited. There's an awareness, and awareness is. It's better than nothing. It's not nothing. We live in a world that is sometimes in deep conflict. Now it's broken out in arms, and I don't know that we do anybody any favors by avoiding it. Avoiding talking with our own kids about it.
Yeah. Maybe we can spend just a minute, and Karl, you can help us with this, but if someone's they've kind of caught wind of it on the news, or just in passing, they're not really paying attention to this. Can you give kind of an easy, I mean, it's probably not easy, but can you give some sort of an explanation of how did we get here? right now in this moment, or at least some way for them to understand why is Russia attacking Ukraine? Like, help me understand.
Sometime back in the 15th century, I suppose.
Maybe not that far back.
Not that far back.
Let's stay 80s and to now.
First of all, I'm not an expert on Ukrainian history or culture. In some ways, Paul probably knows more of the details on that than I do. But Ukraine has, I think of it because of the breakup of the Soviet Union, which was more my era when I was moving out of my doctoral studies, and that's when that was going on.
Yeah.
The various countries that were starting to break away, and under the dissolution, Ukraine became independent. And I want to tell you, it frankly was one of the most corrupt governments for decades. It really was a difficult time for them. Now, some of it was probably influenced by the country of the East, Russia. But they were extraordinarily corrupt in their government system. I mean, you had a president, one of the times when I was there, who most people thought was probably the don of one of the largest criminal families in the country. That's pretty spooky.
Yeah.
Every day was a slog to live for so many people. You had refrigerators that were, the size of a bread box, and so you constantly were doing it. But over time, it is. Frankly, we actually had elections a few years ago, and it's extraordinary. Now, ministry has happened. That's probably part of it. I mean, you got a lot of leadership in Russia that's now claiming Christianity. Yeah. And some of that was because of the freedom now from Russia. Ukraine has a history of religious, and of course, internally, with the Orthodox Church, of course, there's a lot of a splitting that's going on because you have the Russian Orthodox Church, and there's been a breakaway group within Ukraine. That's part of the mix here because the Russian Orthodox Church, to some degree, is sanctioning what's going on from the Russian side, and the Ukrainian side is not so happy. And some of the Russian Orthodox on the Ukrainian side are not happy about the Russian Orthodox. It's really complicated. So as far as history, I mean, again, Ukraine has been a satellite for a long time of Russia. Russia is the dominant force and has been for a long time. But Ukrainian has its own culture. And the joke, the first joke that I had when I literally rode in on a taxi from an airport. The airport was. This is the last time I remember actually getting off an airplane and getting down onto the tarmac and walking across the tarmac because at that time. And but I remember riding a taxi cab, and I asked the taxi cab, "So where do you eat in this town?" He says, "The best place to eat is the restaurant that's underneath the monument that the Soviets built to themselves." Because you don't have to see it. Didn't matter the quality. I mean, there was a little bit of a typical Slavic humor that was designed to, we know, but we can still make jokes about it. It's not pleasant. The Russians had built this huge tower. It's larger than the Liberty Tower in New York, Liberty Statue in New York, and it's a symbolism to Mother Russia, and it's big and it's rather impressive. But the Ukrainians, for the most part, they wanted to speak their own language. They were starting to speak their own language. In fact, one of the major changes that happened in Crimea after it had been invaded was that where you had Ukrainian, a local dialect, and Russian on the same signs, the first two were lost and everything was now in Russian. And the Ukrainians understood that my speaking Ukrainian is part of my independence from Russia. That's why they now call it Kyiv and not Kiev, even though Mussorgsky was a Great Gates of Kiev, his music, his history, and it's all kinds of stuff. But from their point of view, that's not us. We are a separate people. We want our own culture. They have their own music, their everything else. So,
well, even with President Zelensky's, becoming the president, you wonder if maybe Putin saw this as an opportunity because of he was an actor, a stand-up comedian before this who used some of those skills to get into the presidency. I mean, he won people over on social media. He was very charismatic, and even at his time after the elections, and when it was 2020 or 2019 or whatever that was, he kind of lost some approval and maybe fell into some of the traps of past Ukrainian leaders. But this has kind of become his opportunity to show where he stands. And I think the people are now able to rally around him. Again, he's kind of gone to that grassroots, what his strong suit is.
Who knew that an actor could get to be president?
I mean, America has some history there.
Yeah, no, we do have our own history. And in many ways, whatever you think of Reagan directly, he was a beloved president by both sides of the aisle. Now, a lot of people absolutely disagree with him. But, he and Tip O'Neill could actually have lunch together and talk with one another. Yeah. And they were other side of the, but he was liked. He had a good sense of humor. He had a pretty good presence on his debates, public debates. And I think you see some of the same things in Zelensky. Yeah. You actually see a character. He knows how to use the media fairly well. And I'm not comparing this guy with Churchill, but there is some similarity that Churchill was kind of a debated character and then blows on the scene and literally galvanizes a country that we will not give up.
There was a really interesting moment where he's addressing the United Nations and you hear the translator like audibly choking up because of that what he's translating Zelensky saying. He's like holding back the tears, and you get a standing ovation because of it. He's very good at uniting his people and rallying support that way.
His acting skills are good. I don't consider it all to be an act. But he has the skill set to appeal, which is kind of exciting. I mean, it galvanizes the West, and I'd have to say that Putin has not galvanized too many people in the same way. I mean, he's sitting at the far end of a table. He can show up without shirts on, but we make jokes about it.
Right.
When I think of the U.S., we have obviously our own, whether it's the Cold War, past world wars, things like that. Whether I don't want to take this political by any means, but whether
we're a little late for that.
Russia was invading our election or what, there's consistently for the last few decades been a stigmatism towards Russia as an enemy. You've got the Miracle on the Ice and in 1984 and so much of my life all I've ever known is Russia kind of as an enemy, not really friends with the United States. And so we've got our own history of conflict with that country, and it's risen and fallen from different leadership and things like that. And so it definitely seems to be maybe an enemy, or I hear I root against some of the Olympics, like just random things like that, not just out of pride, but like those are bad guys, and I think sometimes we can start to associate, because of war or because of past history, in leadership style, because there's been some shady leaders, especially in Russia or other places, Germany, for example, and then we start to associate a whole people group with a dogmatic leader or somebody who is taking military action and things like that. And so I think there can become some dangers in that for us and for our hearts and for how we feel about people, to throw everybody in Russia as an aggressor, or Russia is this terrible place. And I think we have to continue to put in perspective where the aggression's coming from, the party and just how life happens there. It's not as free as we have the ability to live. And so a lot of those cultural backgrounds, the importance of a place like Ukraine on the map. And so I think for me, I've in this conflict had to try to figure out, okay, what's actually happening here? What biases am I bringing to it? We've talked about this with scripture, but how do I better understand, this kind of situation? And it reminded me of 9/11 and reminded me of just obviously when we were attacked as a country by another country that we declared war on. It wasn't really that, but being attacked by another country, but it was, people that were extremists, an extremist from, a religion, that there became this fear of maybe Muslim people or people from Iraq. And we had all of these false, kind of dichotomies and thoughts of people in the Middle East and stigmatisms that were beginning to rise up because we had to we have to turn these people into an enemy to get us on board for what's happening there. And so it reminded me a little bit of that. And hey, we can't have stigmatism towards an entire millions of people in the country as aggressors or as evil people because of, maybe leadership that's happening there. And
this is a historical worldwide phenomena. When we had World War II, we were pushing Japanese Americans, legitimate Americans, into camps. We know that. Most countries have that where whole people are. I mean, the Rwandan situation is. When your neighbor you've been playing with their kids for the last 10 years turns on you and hacks up your children, that's not normal. And there is a sense in which evil gets radicalized and then moves in a herd mentality. So we did the same. The first experience I had, my dad showed me a picture one time because my roots are German. And he showed me a picture of a great uncle in a Luftwaffe uniform. And I thought, well, that's interesting. There's almost an initial, okay, I should have known better, because they're fighting a war, and their war might have not been their desire, but that's where they got. And before you know it, you got a herd mentality that moves, and everybody has stigmatized the other side. In that case, the scapegoating of the Jews. But virtually everybody that wasn't us. That's how nationalism takes over and becomes aggressive, where everybody else is not just different, but wrong and evil, and I'm willing to do something. So we see that in Germany. We saw that to some degree. I think there's some of that nationalism going on. I think the situation in Russia and Ukraine is complicated because we think of it as sort of a unified country, and there are a lot of relatively loose cannons going around in that country. Some of the eastern provinces, we sort of understood that there was conflict going on ahead of time, and Putin's going to try to convince us, and I'm not sure he's 100% wrong. I think he's about 98% wrong, that there's conflict, and he's trying to put it. Now, it may be an excuse, and I think it is, but there's enough. I don't think anybody in the system thinks that Zelensky is a Nazi, for instance. But there are enough symbolisms going on in some of the individual battalions around the country that have some suggestions that that's there in the culture. So that becomes the excuse. It's not an adequate excuse, but it does become an excuse. So in other words, Ukraine is more complicated than we think. It's not all good anymore than Russia is all bad. And inside, some of the people you meet in Russia are just as godly and as kind as some of the neighbors that you love now. And that's what makes it so difficult. There are believers in both contexts, and some of them side. Some of them are just, we got to figure out how to stay alive.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jess.
Oh, I was just going to say that with what both of you are talking about, it's kind of like we can feel completely out of control and completely powerless to do anything. But I think that, Alex, what you said, and Karl, what you're talking about is that's kind of the key and something that we can be doing is when we're seeing this is like, we're not making everyone the enemy. We're going to go and we're going to eat at this restaurant, or we're going to support these people, and we're going to be inclusive to people from other cultures. And we're not just going to look at a whole group of people and say everyone's the enemy, and then we replicate that. So we decide that for ourselves, and then we, speak into what our friends are saying, or how we lead our family, or how we post on social media. And I think that that's like one of the small things that we can do to kind of help this and to like help our culture, and to like and when I say our culture, it's like even to help our friend culture as like we're all processing this.
I'd love to get to know some local Russians who have the same greed. And I hear this in my friend. He knows everything he's writing to me is monitored. So the things that he can't say, he and I sort of understand that. But I get the sense that there's deep pain, grief, sadness, and probably I don't have many Russian that I know of that are recent in the stateside. But I bet dollars to donuts they're just as conflicted as American Saudis were after 9/11, because the feeling like a target. I mean, of course, in the case of the Muslims, they could become a target literally because you could identify them, and the Russians are a little harder to identify by because they look closer to a European look than much, say, of Africa or something like that. And that's disappointing, but it's still true. And how do we imagine the Russian people feel, those who actually know what's going on? And some of them do. Again, the older people are more likely to listen to the state-sponsored.
Which there's just so much misinformation there,
Right.
because they're just, I mean, you're
Right.
hearing stories of people in Ukraine talking to relatives in Russia, and the people in Russia are saying, "Oh no, this is just a military operation,"
Right.
and they're like, "No, my backyard's
It's
bombed."
just been bombed. Yeah. My building is down, and my kids are on the other side of the country because I had to send them away.
Yeah.
I think that's a certain joke. But here's the deal: I suspect there's plenty of the same stuff coming out of Ukraine too. So being careful to examine the news. The upside is that we got a lot of reporters that are trying to stay in and out of Ukraine, which is much harder for. It's harder to hide. It still can be doctored, but it's harder to hide. There's a lot more confirmation that can be done about things that are going on. If a building goes down that happens to be an apartment building, and you saw the rocket go into it, you got a pretty good idea that there was a rocket going in and somebody didn't just light a bomb underneath it to take it down as a false flag type operation.
Yeah, I think the question, that ultimately we lead into is, and Paul talked about this a little bit, maybe some ways we can continue to pray, but like, how do we, as people on this side of the world, not a lot we can do, yet I think prayer is the most powerful thing we can do as well. But how do we begin to lament and grieve these types of things, like this situation? Do you guys feel in Ukraine, just conflict in general?
I mean, this isn't directly connected maybe to the grieving process, but I think one of the things that we saw with the Afghan refugees is just people all across this country and other countries as well kind of stepping up to accept those refugees. Now, I mean, we're not Poland, who has the largest border to Ukraine, but they're definitely accepting a lot of the refugees from Ukraine right now. But I'm sure we're going to start to see an influx of that in the States. My wife mentioned to me that she saw that one of the food pantries in Omaha are starting to import foods that would be similar to what the Afghans could find in their stores.
Something familiar.
Because they're getting here and there's such culture shock. They're not seeing, what is this food on the shelves? It's stuff that we eat. So I think something like that, just having those, I mean, it's part of that where you're grieving with these people is to understand their culture, try to understand what they're going through. And I mean, I think for me, part of that process is just educating myself on things that I don't understand.
Yeah, and Poland is a great example because they've absorbed so far that I know of about 2 million. That's a phenomenal amount of people, and I mean, and other European countries are saying, "Can you keep them in your country for a while until we figure out what to do?" Because they've opened it. Poland has history of war. I mean, they've been deported, invaded, and pushed around as well. So bless their hearts. They have managed to handle an extraordinary. I don't know when that stops. I mean, people are living in other people's houses.
Yeah.
How do we educate ourselves well enough to know how to sympathize, how to grieve on behalf of others?
I think for me, I had to let myself feel something because there's all these feelings and emotions and around it, and I feel like I really emotionally connected to the picture at the train station in Poland where all the moms were leaving their strollers for the moms that were coming in off the train. And I'm like, I just sat in that because it's kind of like one of those things where you could just kind of scroll and it's like on with my day. It doesn't really affect me, but it does affect me because Jesus made those people and he loves them and they're created in his image. And so I feel like, and we've had conversations about this on different things in the past, Karl, just, in your office, but just like, it's okay to be sad. and mad. And there's so much lamenting in the Bible. And we can ask God why. We can shake our little fists at him and say, you know, what's going on? And maybe it's not always the right thing, but he can handle it.
Yeah.
Because he's a strong and a good God. And so I think that we kind of forget that it's okay to lament. And there's a lot of it in Scripture.
I think this is probably the area that, as an American community, we don't lament well.
Yeah.
In fact, so you lost a friend. Are you over it yet? A tendency is to think, how quickly can we get over these things? And the canon of the Psalms, which I take it the canon of the Psalms is kind of the prayer book of Jesus to some degree. I mean, he hangs on a cross, and what does he do? He quotes a psalm. Why have you forsaken me? And every Jew of the time would have known that and would heard. We hear it ourselves in the church. We still hear it. And of the Psalms, so many of them, 60% of them are deeply embedded with lament. That meant that life was in distress and people got sick and life was difficult, grief. We just had this discussion in our own community group this past week. We asked the question, why don't we lament very well? We're afraid of losing control, you know, and we really don't like to admit that things are dangerous. And the one thing I know for sure, every one of my kids, or your kids, are going to grow up and they're going to die, short of the Lord showing up again on the scene. I'm sorry, I'm going to go through pain. They're going to go through pain. They're going to see me go through pain, probably see me die. Life has its wonderful things about it. It's good.
Yeah.
But it also has a lot of pain involved with it. And so all throughout the Psalms, you have this sense that I'm being slandered. And every one of them, the Psalms tends to start with, Lord, how long? Or why? Lord, save me. This is a mess. David went through a bunch of them. And the fact that we do not know how, you know the one emotion that we find, at least on the male side of the species, is anger. But you see in David, I think, in an inspired form for us, sadness, grief, weeping, anger, all kinds of things going on. So yeah, I think the need, and it's actually the part that we probably need people to lead us in right now. I think that's why some of the liturgical churches, you know, everybody says that we don't have liturgy. I had this conversation last week. Yeah, we don't have liturgy, but we sing, and we sing the words. Now, we add music, but we sing the words. We all know what to say. We all know what to sing. So the only difference is whether it's spoken or sad. So sometimes there are times when it's right to be led. And I think the Psalms often help us. So even in our community group, I just took Psalm 58 and just read it. Lord, bash their fangs. It was just, how do you pray that? Well, literally, the only way you do it is say, Lord, that's an expression of grief. Now, most of the Psalms are directed to God, so there's a sense that God's the place to start. But you see this shaking of fist. He doesn't turn away.
Yeah.
He turns to, and he expresses grief process, anger, all the rest of that stuff. So we're not very good at that.
One of those things I was thinking of, Jess, when you were saying you just had to feel something. I guess this is a plug for our Origins series we're going through right now, but I was thinking about how, you know, Eve was deceived by the serpent because she wanted the knowledge, right? She wanted to eat of the tree of good and evil because she was told this lie that she would be like God. And I think, like, as we live in this ever-shrinking world where we are constantly bombarded with tragedy and injustice, and we see this all around us, and it's like, as humans, we are incapable of processing this much tragedy and evil. We just can't. We do not have the emotional capacity to always grieve everything and lament everything. And I think that's one of the things that we can look at the fallen nature of this world that we live in is, here's this thing where God was trying to protect us from this knowledge, and like you can almost see this parallel drawn now that like here it is, we just keep getting more and more of it, and it is almost impossible to process.
Heard a good sermon on that a couple weeks ago.
It was pretty good, actually.
Oh, yeah. What was the pastor's name? Maybe I'll follow him on Instagram.
Minister Alex. No, I mean, so much of that was just resounding with me, not because I preach it, but because I got to study it and process. And that idea of us choosing our own knowledge, our own wisdom is something. So, yeah, I think in getting to how do we pray for this, I think one is just always and remembering that it is the most powerful thing we can do. You know, it feels juvenile maybe at times or not like enough, but asking a sovereign God to intercede, to be a part of this. And I don't think it's not just talking and telling God what you think should happen. It's listening. I think that prayer is partly lamenting. Oftentimes we just talk about prayer as if it's this one-way monologue between me and God. And I think, man, it's asking that, you know, God, how do I feel? You know, like bring me, it's dangerous. God, break my heart for these people. Make my heart love these people. God will do that in prayer. If you just stop talking for a few moments, you make a petition to him. And, you know, and then he'll even give you things to pray for. I know even when this began, like the day that this conflict began, you know, Eric came into my office. He's like, maybe we should just put a prayer, do a live prayer on Instagram of just praying through this. And you want to do it? I'm like, okay. And it was just that idea of some psalms, you know, I went to, but even, an intercessory prayer that I often go to when I'm like, I don't know. Like, Lord, you've prompted me to pray for something. I don't have all the words. And it is a kind of a liturgical prayer to go through. But then it's always fascinating how you talk and then you stop talking and you listen, you know, some divine things that the Lord will drop into your heart in this moment. And so maybe that's not a prayer of blabbing, but a prayer of listening and asking God to reveal himself and his will for these people and his care for these people, and maybe drop as much as you can handle, because we couldn't handle all of it.
And I think sometimes too with so much of the weight of it, part of our human nature is to control what's going on and to control even maybe the narrative or the why. And I think some of that's just important to relinquish, because we don't need to add to the misinformation, the other stuff that goes on out there. We just have to kind of let go of that control and realize we don't have it. And yes, we feel this weight of all this evil and we want to find an answer that we can stomach. But the sad truth is that answer doesn't exist. And that's all we can do is confess that.
Yeah. And then I think of, the power of prayer. I mean, I think of Matthew 8, in situations like this, when the centurion comes to Jesus and he doesn't bring is it his servant that's paralyzed, and he says, Jesus, my servant's paralyzed, like just say the word. And Jesus is like, do you want me to come with you? And he's like, no, just say it. And he believed in Jesus's words. And to me, that I'm reminded of the power of prayer in that, because Jesus wasn't with that person for them to be healed. And it reminds me of just like our words and our petitions to the Lord don't fall in vain because we're thousands of miles away. And that story in the Bible, it reminds me of this situation when we were looking at the situation in Afghanistan, and just even, across the country when we're faced with things like that. It's like the power of prayer in Jesus' words, and we don't have to be staring somebody eyeball to eyeball for that to be a powerful thing that changes.
This is a wonderful line in Chronicles. We do not know what to do, but our eyes are on you. And they're in an invasion situation. The immediate next text says, meanwhile, all Judah stood before the Lord with their little ones, their wives, and their children. It's an amazing picture. And the Lord shows up and said, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes you would have liked to have said that in 1943. It didn't happen for a while. I have no idea. I think the concept since the beginning of original sin has an extraordinarily explanatory value. it helps us to grasp just how awkward we are, and how I don't tend to think that we're individually worse than we ever were, because I mean, you're going to look at Genesis 6 coming up, and there was always evil and intentions and things like that. I think evil's been around pretty good, but there's something about as the culture has grown and more and more people show up, our ability to have radicalized evil gets really compelling. That when you get evil in herd and group mentality, it's really striking. Wars reflect a lot of that. My friend in Moscow says he feels like he needs to be a pacifist at this point. He just read too much and seen too much history. He can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think that does it for our time here today. Karl, thanks for your insight on this. Appreciate that. And another thank you to Paul for his time in recording that segment. That's, again, very helpful. And thanks, Alex and Jess, for doing your part. And everyone out there who's listening for doing your part. That's using your ears or your eyes to take this all in. And if you have any questions or concerns, we'd love to hear from you. You can email us at podcast@cccomaha.org, or you can reach out to us on social media @cccomaha. But until next time, we'll talk to you then.